It's a very, very cold Wednesday morning from this side of Nigeria, particularly Lagos, as we welcome you to Breakfast Central here on News Central. Well, I don't know what it's like from where you are. If you live in Lagos, I think it's going to be very tough today because of the traffic and, most importantly, the chaotic situation that we are about to face. But anyway, I'm not a, deliverer of bad news. I just want to say good morning to you and welcome to Breakfast Central here on News Central on a Wednesday morning. Like I said, it's wet and it's the 22nd day in the month of May as we count down to the end of the month. By the way, you're in for the biggest and, of course, the top stories that we look forward to bring to you here today. So many conversations around the Central Bank of Nigeria, the increase in the rates as well, interest rates, not forgetting too. River State is also ravishing, and not forgetting too, a lot of stories coming out from there. And News Central is about to do it again. This time we're having another town hall, and it's going to be at Okama. We have all of that story and much more when Olive definitely will be bringing to you every single thing concerning the other inside stories. I'm sure you would be looking forward to hear each and every one of it. One of the biggest stories as we look forward to today's show will be that one that's gotten everyone talking. And no doubt it's got to be that big story with the Central Bank of Nigeria. Mazino Appeal joins me on a wet Wednesday morning. Good morning to you, Mazino.
Johansson, you're looking good. Now, you did say it was a very cold morning, but then I was waiting for you to say it was wet. Drove here in conditions I've never driven in my entire 30 years of driving history. I'm wondering how you made it today.
It was tough. I mean, the crossing the bridge, I mean, we did see a lot of cars broken down. They're already causing traffic. Some parts of the roads have been covered with water. So it's going to be a tough one, especially for Lagosians, commuters who might want to move from point A to point B. They might have to do a lot of rethinking in quotes. And I think it's that time for you to possibly, if you can, work from home. If you can, I'm just saying.
If you can, do work from home, because I'm talking about 5 a.m. this morning and the roads were entirely flooded. Yeah. And not just that, but it was a very interesting experience this morning. First of all, I was very disoriented driving. For the first time in my life, I actually felt fear while driving to work. And not just because the roads were wet, but also because the fact that there were no street lights, there were no indications, there's nothing to help you actually stick to your path on the road. And I'm wondering, what exactly happened to all the street lights? Why aren't they? For the first time today, I actually appreciate the fact that even maybe 1 out of 10 street lights might work, but today none of them were working. It was real bad. Yeah,
and I think we did see the benefits of having street lights working, because at some point, with the weather, the wind, you couldn't just see anything. And when you even had a little opportunity to gaze, the street lights did come to the rescue. But imagine not having street lights. And that's one thing that Lagos has been battling with. Street lights not working in certain districts, certain parts of Lagos. It's a big conversation. But then again, another conversation in the news, Mazino, that everyone is talking about is the alleged money laundering. EFCC looking forward to prosecute a contractor over 2.17 billion naira funds. Now, it was mentioned yesterday during the prosecution where Contractor said that he was given 2.17 billion naira funds and nothing. There was no project that was carried out from the office of the president. Talking about the past President Muhammadu Buhari. And we're talking about his cabinet, where monies were seen moving from one place to the other. And this one is the latest, 2.17 billion naira funds, and no project was done at all. It's generated a lot of conversation on the social media space. Everyone is saying, where are these people and why are they not locked up as we speak?
Well, that's a very interesting input here, Joe, because I'm going to take us back 8 years or 9 years, just at the start of the governance for Buhari. I remember what their motto was: corruption. They were going to fight it. And we all had that kind of hope that, since knowing his pedigree, being an ex-military officer and also former head of state, that this was going to be the time to see everybody who was perhaps maybe doing all the wrong things brought to book. But then after that dispensation, seeing every single little unit of information that comes out regarding corruption from that government has actually been very overwhelming. And I'll tell you something, we're not done yet. There's still so much that we might find out as the time goes. I don't know whether to give credit to the current government, to say whether they're doing properly, or maybe the EFCC, perhaps maybe them. But I'm telling you, this is only one of many yet to come.
Well, for me, I wouldn't say we shouldn't be in a hurry to actually give them any credit yet, because no one has actually been persecuted. No one has actually been locked up. No one has actually been sentenced to life imprisonment and say, hey, this is what you're going to get, and so on. And that 2.17 billion did come from the National Security Advisor's Office. So that's what we hear as well. And I'm thinking that by now, there should have been an arrest, warrants, and so on. But like they say, it's a bit too early. So let's just wait a little while and see what the EFCC will do between now and next week. One of the biggest stories as well that we are quickly looking at is Nigeria's housing sector. So there's this renewed Hope Home portal, which the current federal government has opened up for Nigerians. So Mazino, I don't know if you have a house of yours. I mean, I can't tell. I can't say that on national TV. But then again,
I can't give the address out. No,
you know,
just leave that as private information, whether or whether not. I'll just not tell. But Joe, this wouldn't be the first time we've had renewed hope when it comes to the housing scheme in Nigeria. Over the years, we've seen this come and go, come and go. What happens is you have this flurry of activity in the beginning, and then after that, you begin to realize that as a common man, you cannot attain these things, and that's where the problem is. You can't get housing for all, but exactly what class of people are you saying can get these houses? Is it the common man like you and I, because we are common people, or is it the people who are with upper echelons of society who are able to? If you go to Abuja, you'd find these big housing estates, and then people come out and say, yes, we've done our bit when it comes to what we provided for the citizens. However, which citizens? Is it fair? Does it go all around to all classes of people, or is it just for a select few who are affluent? That's the question we need to ask regarding these processes that are being put in place. No matter how golden they look, and you want to check out the fine details before we start shouting hooray.
I agree with you, because it's quite one thing to say that there's a renewed home portal which is open to Nigerians, and another thing for Nigerians to be able to go there, feel free, have the assurance that if they meet the criteria, they will definitely be able to get a home of their own, and not with what's going on now where homes are being demolished. Homes that are built on sweat, blood, and tears by individuals who have worked so hard to ensure that they get their own home, because the federal government is not providing homes. But you know what? If we keep this conversation going, I'm sure we're going to end in the next 2 hours, and then we're going to lose out on some of the preparations that we have. This is
not the show.
On the show. So it's not the show, it's the show before the real show.
Exactly.
Okay? Anyway, Mazino joins us with breakfast headlines in a bit, but let me quickly show to you what we have for you on our top stories this morning on a Wednesday. A wet Wednesday it is. Today on Breakfast Central, NLC rejects federal government's newly proposed 54,000 minimum wage. It was 48,000. The federal government just said, let's top up 6,000 naira for you. CBN raises interest rate for third time to 26.25%. The last time they did that was in March as well. Lagos State tops record of domestic violence cases. Not too good, and we look forward to have that discussion. New Central to hold town hall meeting in Okama community in River State, and we'll be here, I beg your pardon, Delta, and we look forward to bring to you all that information. Plus, we do have the front pages. What are they saying? Stay with us. Up next, Breakfast Headlines.
Welcome. This is Breakfast Headlines here on New Central TV. My name is Mazino Peel. Now we begin in Nigeria, capital Abuja, where the Senate says it will convene a national security summit in an effort to find lasting solutions to the nation's pressing insecurity challenges. The Senate, during its plenary in Abuja, says that the summit will provide a platform for heads of security agencies, governors, traditional rulers, socio-cultural groups, amongst others, to deliberate and find lasting solutions to the escalating insecurity being witnessed across the country. Meanwhile, locals on Tuesday buried their loved ones after bandits killed 40 people in a Monday night attack in Wuse local government, or rather Wase local government area of Plateau State. Gunmen were said to have invaded the village of Zurak Bashar district of Wase, which is known to be a very lucrative site for mining. The Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Nigeria has raised the monetary policy rate for the third time this year, which benchmarks interest rates from 24.75% to 26.25%. This marks the 11th consecutive rate hike since May 2022 in a bid to curb inflation. Despite these efforts, between May 2022 and April 2024, inflation has risen from 17.71% to 33.69%. The meeting on the ongoing negotiations on a new minimum wage was adjourned till Wednesday after the organized labor rejected the new 54,000 naira minimum wage proposed by the federal government. Tuesday's meeting came as a result of the walkout staged by members of the organized labor following the proposal of 48,000 naira as minimum wage by the federal government during last week's meeting. Lawyers to the detained leader of the proscribed indigenous people of Biafra, Nnamdi Kanu, have filed a preliminary objection of the Federal High Court Abuja, asking the trial judge, Justice Binta Nyako, to decline jurisdiction to proceed with the trial against him. Part of the issue for determination is whether the court has the jurisdiction to try Kanu for any or all of the offenses charged against him in the counts 1, 2, 4, 5, and 8. And in more news, Guinea's anti-junta National Front for the Defense of the Constitution has threatened to protest if military rule is extended in the country. The military, who seized power in the West African country in 2021, had agreed under pressure from regional bloc ECOWAS to organize elections by the end of 2024. However, junta appointed Prime Minister Ahmadou Ba has said in recent weeks that the military will not be able to honor this commitment and should remain in power until at least 2025. And that's all on Breakfast Headlines. Back to Joe, and I'm hoping Olive is with us already.
Thank you so much. Olive is around the corner, most importantly. Get ready to join us, of course, ensuring that our guest is equally here with her. So definitely she'll be here so we can actually kickstart our conversations. But then again, great story, we can say. I think one of the stories you indeed read has got to do with a Labour Party and not forgetting to the Nigeria Labour Congress. So there was a mixture yesterday with the headlines, especially from different quarters on social media and some of the newspapers. It was indeed rumored or touted that Peter Obi had joined the Nigeria Labour Congress in ensuring that picketing did take place in different parts of the country. But that's not true. It's quite a different scenario where we did see Peter Obi actually go to the Nigeria Labour Party. He was said he was drumming support for the current national chairman, Julius Abure. So it was quite different, although many people were saying it's this, it's that. But then again, let's come back to the main conversation. 54,000 naira, Mazino. What are you going to do with 54,000 naira if you're a federal government worker?
Lifestyles differ rather. So I'm not going to particularly say exactly how that's going to, how far that's going to go.
Can we break it down? Can we just break it down for Nigerians? What 54? I can break it down from the top of my head, but I'd like to hear your own breakdown very quickly.
Okay. Real quick, 54,000 naira doesn't fuel both cars. That's mine or my wife's. So that's a problem for me. If I have to use
hold on. To fill one car for you, it's going to be possibly like 35,000 naira for one.
You're looking at about that range, 30,000 naira or more, if it's Madame's one. But then again, that for me is the exact amount that will do for about a week.
Ooh.
Just a week of going up and down trying to make my daily bread. So I'm imagining what other families have to go through, especially noting that the NLC and the Labour, the TUC, have actually benchmarked this based on a family of 6 living inside of a metropolis like Lagos, for instance. If you have to use public transport, if you have to buy fuel, if you have to pay for your electricity, which has risen, by the way, almost 100% in the past 1 year, you will then imagine, or you can then get exactly why Labour is insisting on 615,000 naira. But I'm also asking, where exactly will the compromise be met? What would happen if they add, and say, perhaps maybe let's take these 54,000 naira and subsidize some things, perhaps free transportation, maybe?
Yeah,
maybe.
I mean, finally, we do know the gas, cars, CNGs and all, whatever. Finally, what do you think should be the benchmark for the minimum wage?
Joe, you're asking, that's a very, I mean, we had the PRO on Saturday on Breakfast Extra, and he actually mentioned a figure, although this wasn't just a figure that he thought that might be appropriate. It was somewhere around 250 and 300 was what he said.
Okay.
And if you want to check that, you can go back on YouTube and see the conversation we had with him. It was very interesting, but the way that he spaced it out and defined every single thing, what's needed and why that amount might be necessary, was very clear, and it was beautiful. It was a beautiful conversation.
All right. Thank you so much, Waziri Appeal, for joining us. We'll see you again at 9 a.m. West African time when you bring to us News Now.
Thank you very much, Joe.
All right. Just watching Breakfast Central, and we do have so much more to bring to you. So much conversations, and we'll look forward to have you join us in the course of our conversation for the 8 a.m. hour. So ensure you recharge your phone lines or your numbers so you can actually call. We'll go for that quick break. When we come back, it's our top stories up next here on Breakfast Central. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us here on Breakfast Central. All is now set for News Central's town hall meeting with the returnees of the Okama community in Ueli South local government area of Delta State, South Nigeria. The aim is actually to amplify the cry for help by those who lost their homes and property in the aftermath of the bloodbath of March 14 in the community. News Central's correspondent Austin Azu completes this report.
Since the dark Thursday when 17 soldiers of the Nigerian Army were killed in an ambush at the riverbank of Okama, peace took a distant flight from the community and its people. The invasion and destruction of Okama thereafter drove the people into homelessness as they turned the forest in neighboring communities to their dwelling place. 59 days after the army withdrew from the community, the people have returned to the ruins of where they called home. News Central has been in the forefront of telling this story, and now the primary interest is to advance the restoration of peace and see a possible quick resettling of the people in their homeland. On Tuesday, less than 24 hours to the town hall meeting, being hosted by News Central in Okama, the managing director of News Central led the crew members on the spot assessment of the venue. The team conducted round the destroyed community by the community former councillor, reaffirmed News Central's commitment to be the voice to the voiceless.
Make you help me tell them how you feel. Now how you feel, not how I say make you feel. Now how you feel, make you tell them. So that then go hear you, then go see you, then go know. The world, where we say then they travel, go around, wear babariga, wear suits, where then they go there, they do meeting, then go ask them, say, how una they treat una people like this? This one is good. So you need to let everybody, make them see, say, the way they treat you, if you know good, tell them. If you good, tell them.
Meanwhile, the IDP camp in Ewo Grammar School, which was declared ready to receive Okama returnees earlier last week, remains empty. The people rejecting the camp set up by the state government choose to return to the ruins of their land, hoping to begin life again. In Okama community, Delta State for News Central, Austin Azu.
And just to inform you that the Okama town hall meeting with News Central will begin at 11 a.m. West African time. So you could stay tuned here. You did see the managing director himself, Mr. Kaide Akintemi, there breaking it down, especially to the returnees after that sad and tragic incident that did take place, telling them it's time for them to pour out their hearts and go ahead and talk.
Tragic indeed, because one can't imagine the measure of heartbreak they've had to go through, waking up one morning in your home and before the end of the day you've become a member of an IDP camp, you've become homeless. It's quite heartbreaking to imagine. I'm glad that News Central is at the forefront of championing this conversation. We hope to hear more of their stories, more of their voices, and see the government stepping up to the plate. Now move on from that story. The Central Bank of Nigeria's Monetary Policy Committee, MPC, has increased the monetary policy rate, MPR, which serves as the benchmark for interest rates, from 24.75% to 26.25%. Governor of the CBN, Nnamdi Kanu, who doubles as the chairman of the MPC, disclosed the new interest rates at the end of the 295th MPC meeting, which was held on Monday and Tuesday in Abuja. This is the third increase since February. While speaking on the continued instability of the Nigerian currency, Cardozo said that it was a function of the free market system. We're joined this morning by emerging market financial analyst Ebuka Imebina. Good morning and thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning and happy to be here.
All right. This will be the third increase by the Central Bank of Nigeria and by the Monetary Policy Committee. What are your thoughts about this? Is this a positive move? Is this something to be very excited about?
I think in terms of whether you're excited about this, it depends on who you are and whether you have loans, existing loans, or planning to take loans, for example, from a financial institution. So for current holders of mortgage instruments or any other form of short-term borrowing or long-term borrowing, they will definitely have to pay higher interest on their loans. In terms of the impact on inflation, which is the primary objective for which we are seeing this increase, I think over time, like you mentioned, this is the third increase in over the last few meetings. And it must be emphasized that month on month, there's been a decline in inflation rates. But year on year, we haven't seen a commensurate decline in inflation rates, which is why we're seeing this increase in the prime lending rate from the central bank. So in terms of how does this impact, the primary objective, which is inflation? The central bank's primary function is price stability and also full employment. And so, in a desire to achieve that price stability, we are seeing these responses from the monetary authorities. However, the extent to which, like I mentioned, to which this would actually then dovetail into prices is what we do not know. However, I must say that the primary role of the central bank, which we mentioned as price stability and full employment, I listened to the CBN governor's announcement, of this increase from the committee, and I was actually surprised that I didn't get any head up on the employment rates. So usually when interest rates are raised, the primary impact you want to see would be firms begin to, it's usually to reduce demand. So you want to see reduce demand on the consumer side, and then you also want to see some measure of supply restriction from firms, and that usually translates into the rate of employment. So firms begin to kind of sort of slow down on their operations. And so I didn't hear any questions. I didn't hear any responses on unemployment. And so, one begins to really ask, to what extent do we think that these rates increases are impacting firms, impacting ordinary people? And then to what extent do we think that they would actually go in achieving their purpose?
All right. While we do understand that, the CBN is actually at war now with the economy. It's much more like it's a battlefield. So the CBN is trying all it can to ensure that it stabilizes the economy and that there wouldn't be any form of inflation, especially looking at the fact that food items can at least come down to a very, very minimal, so that everybody, all Nigerians, will be able to feed. But I'm worried, and my worry is what I would like to ask to you. What happens to those who had taken loans before a review of this interest rates? Now, whether they like it or not, it's usually known that there will be a review in the rates, in the prices, in the costs rather. There'll be a review so that the loans that were taken can actually match the new interest rates of what the CBN has actually brought out, which was yesterday. So if I took a loan, and I'm worried right now, what can you say about this? And did the CBN miss this in line with trying to ensure they stabilize the economy? What's the role? What's the future? What's the hope for those who took loans?
Yeah, very good question, I must say. However, when you look at an economy, you looked at as a whole system, not just one part of it in isolation. Yes, and so when I listened to the CBN governor's address again, and he did mention the increase in food inflation over time, and that being a primary cause, and mentioned factors such as insecurity, imports, exchange rate transmission, and all of that. For me, if you ask me, I see these increases as having a dual function. There's the objective to equally impact exchange rates while also being able to have an impact on inflation. But like I said earlier, when you look at this, you have to look at it holistically. It's a system. And if you're looking at that system, the monetary authorities also need to look at how some of their own policies have actually resulted in this runaway inflation which we are currently having. And I'll look at the money supply, for example, the broad money supply. It has increased to as high as 92 trillion according to the central bank's own records in March 2024, from 56 trillion in a similar period in April 2023. So in about a 1 year period, we've seen more than a doubling of broad money supply. And action then needs to be taken to actually mop up some of this. We saw the CRR, which is the cash reserve ratio, remaining unchanged. I would have expected an increase in that. Where I'm going really is that a lot of the inflation which we see in our economy, the Nigerian economy, it's not necessarily driven by excess consumer demand. You look at money in circulation, it's not necessarily with the commercial institutions. So it's more, a lot of it is money increased demand deposits. So generally we need to look at the economy from a more holistic perspective. To address your question in particular, around interest rates, it must be said that this will definitely impact the cost of production for firms, and I would expect them to transmit it to consumers. And so what that means is people would likely want to spend less. People will be thinking about, servicing their loans, increased cost of basic food items and all of that. So there has to be a push on the fiscal side to actually cushion some of these effects on the ordinary man, the ordinary Nigerian.
How effective would this new move, would it be to target food inflation? We know that food inflation currently stands at over 40%. And there are many who would argue that the driver of the food inflation would be setting other criteria. For example, we have insecurity, which is at an all-time high, according to some of the reports that we see. I mean, it's worse than it's been in a long time. So there are those who argue that this might not really do much to be able to target or deal with food inflation. I'd like to find out what your thoughts are on that.
Yes, I would say that if you look at Nigeria, is not a standalone emerging economy. We are in a world of, if you look at the global economy, we are similar. The situations which we face is similar to what you have in so many other countries. And so if you take a walk back into the past, you find out that countries like Brazil, for example, had started increasing rates in order to tackle inflation. You had global inflation from the coronavirus, the pandemic. You had a lot of money being put into circulation across the world, and then you had supply chain bottlenecks, and all of that caused rising inflation, which in the developed world they are still trying to tackle. So if you looked at the actions of central banks in other countries, similar developing markets, you find out that they began to raise interest rates much more earlier than we have done. And so for us, our own response is a little bit late, but the way I would look at it is you still have to do what you have to do. And so what you could have done before is probably what you're doing now, but like they say, better late than never. So this is an inevitable action. I've been on your program before, and I did mention then that this was the single missing piece if you look at it from a textbook perspective, this was still the single missing piece at that time from the CBN's policy responses. And so this is a necessary medicine in order to tackle the inflation rate. But the impact on economic growth, is something that must be considered. And I do not know the extent to which that has been fully thought out, but it needs to be the impact on the productive sector, needs to be very, very well thought out. Again, I must say that if you look at some of the actions which are necessary over time, inflation is usually persistent, even in developed economies, and similar to the actions which we have in our own economy. Inflation is usually very persistent and takes at least a 3 to 5 year window to actually begin to turn around. And so the permutation for Nigeria, we have an inflation target of I think 10%, and currently from the April figures is 33.69%, so way above. If you look at the policy rates, which has just been released, is 26%. So it's still even below the inflationary level. What that means is that real interest rates are not market reflective. Again, central banks, monetary authorities, are not necessarily the best at forecasting inflation. They're not necessarily the best. Rates really are a market perspective. Rates are a market phenomenon. And if you want to see the outlook for rates, I think you should look at what's happening in the market, what's happening in the bond market, the fixed income market. And that tells you what the perception, what the market perception of rates really would be. So the central bank is trying their best within their own limits of authority. The actions which we are taking now, I think, are actions which should have been taken in the past. But again, the central bank in this existing regime did inherit a difficult situation. Interest rates, real interest rates, are still negative, and so to what extent does this really solve the problem? Do we think that we're going to see higher interest rates in the short term? There's a possibility for that, and that's largely because we have taken action a little too late.
All right. I mean, you've broken it down. In other words, if I'm to sum up the points that you've made, it's an action that ought to have been taken earlier. They should have done this since. And you're saying it's going to take at least between now and 5 years for the inflation to come down. We've seen a similar situation in the UK, where the inflation rate in the UK is starting to really to come down. But I'd like us to translate it to the common man on the streets. We do understand that in all of this, one of the beneficiaries of the monetary policy, so to say, are those who have monies in the bank, because they're going to have a lot of interest on their savings right now, especially now that the interest rate has gone up. It means if I have money, XYZ amount, like 100,000 naira in the bank, the rates that I would get in terms of interest rates of my money would actually go up. But how does this affect the common man? How does this affect the price of bread, the price of beans, which is to be used to make akara, the price of groundnut oil? Do recall that we're not a producing state, we're rather a consumption. We're known for consumption. So can you break this down for us? It's also good that we know the truth, the likelihood of not just having one beneficiary, which is if I have money in the bank. What about those who don't have money in the bank?
Yeah, very good question. Again, I'll look at it again from a finance perspective. Inflation rates as high as 33%. So what that means is if you borrow from a bank today, within 2 years, you would actually have paid back as much as double of what you borrowed in principal and interest, using the rule of 72. So within 2 years, you would have actually you'll be paying back almost twice what you borrowed. And now that's for a person who is trying to do business, productive business. And what about a person who says, okay, I have money in the bank? If you have money in the bank, the real value of what you have, considering inflation, is actually also running down. Within 2 years, you are actually losing as much as 100% of the value of what you have if the current inflation rate persists, which we've said that Nigeria has an inflation target of 10%. The probability that we get back there, is actually very, very minimal within the next 3 to 5 years. And so the impact of this is, the average person is in a dilemma. For what I receive, do I spend it now, or does it really make sense for me to save? And then if I'm trying to even spend it now, to what extent does it actually meet my needs in terms of my purchasing power ability? I listened to your news roundup where you talked about the minimum wage. I would have expected that, again, if we're looking at the impact on the ordinary person, I would have expected that with the fuel subsidy removals and all of that, the move to a flexible exchange rate, what that meant was that the government revenues have actually, as much as significantly increased over time, and some of those increases have not been passed on to workers. And so when you have that, but again, remember that when you have that, then you continue to have that spiral of inflation, because it means that people then have more money to spend, and then it continues as a spiral.
Right.
And so, yeah, perhaps the way the government is looking at this is that, the real wage, they're trying to restrict the real wage, the actual purchasing power of people, so that at the end of the day, the inflation itself is actually a tax.
All right.
On the common man.
Ebuka Emebina, thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much.
All right, we still have more to come this morning. This very wet, rainy morning here on Breakfast Central. It's raining in Lagos, and we wonder what the weather is like wherever you are. But let us know on Twitter at News Central TV. We'll go on a break, and when we come back, more conversations to come up. Negotiations may not be ending soon between the organized labor and the federal government, as Labour has yet again rejected the federal government's latest 54,000 naira minimum wage offer. Last week, organized labor, consisting of the Nigeria Labour Congress and the Trade Union Congress, told federal government to perish any thought of offering 100,000 naira as the new minimum wage, insisting that it used the lowest minimum in arriving at 615,000 naira as the new minimum wage.
Meanwhile, the presidential candidate of the Labour Party in the 2023 general election, Mr. Peter Obi, has said what should be of utmost concern to all Nigerians, irrespective of class or political status, is how citizens will survive the current economic hardship, not about the next elections. He noted this at a solidarity visit to the National Secretariat of the Federal Capital Territory chapter of the Labour Party. Now, his comments comes amid speculations of the merger between Peter Obi's Labour Party and the People's Democratic Party. But then again, the current ruling party, the APC, has said that will not happen. I wonder why they're speaking for, two other parties and they're not there. But then again, joining us this morning to look at Labour Congress's latest situation and back and forth with the federal government is public affairs analyst Nnamdi Kanu joins us. Thank you so much for being here.
Always a pleasure.
All right. I hope you did not see rain. I
don't think anybody in Lagos didn't see it today.
It's still ready, by the way. But let's go to the core of the problem. 54,000 naira and 48,000 naira was like, just say, let's just put Jara 6,000 naira for them. And Labour Congress is saying this wouldn't work. What's your thought, first of all?
Well, first thing is that government has shifted a little bit. It's a good thing, at least they're not obdurate to the point where they're sticking with their initial offer. See, in this type of a negotiation, it's going to be give and take on both sides. So if the government has adjusted some, you would expect that, okay, Labour will also reconsider some. 615 to 48,000 is a very wide gulf. It's as wide as the Atlantic Ocean. But it's got to be a meeting point somewhere in between. So Labour is saying that their major beef with the government's offer is that they've not given them any breakdown. What is the basis for the 54,000? How much have you allocated for all of the issues that make up our quality of life, rents, transportation, feeding, school fees, that when they came up with 615,000, they actually gave the data sector by sector in terms of what makes up our daily lives. They allocated so much to food, so much to rent, so much to school fees, so much to all the things. And that's how they came up with their figures. So they're saying, government, justify the 54,000. How did you come up with 54,000? And they're using their own criteria for a family of 6 parents and 4 children. And they're saying, even this 54,000 can't feed a single individual, can't keep you in living conditions in a month. So I think in every negotiation, there's always a dance. And I think what they're doing right now is they're posturing. And I think ultimately that Labour knows 615,000 is not sustainable, it's not realistic. I think they just put it out there as a negotiating gambit, and that the reality is somewhere in between. For me, if I could see something like 100,000, I think it's workable, because let's also remember that inflation is a real issue. If they start throwing out wild numbers willy-nilly, it'll affect the prices. No landlord is going to know that your salary has tripled and won't increase your rent. If you remember in the 70s, the Udoji Awards that doubled or tripled civil servants' emoluments, it caused runaway inflation in the country because prices of everything went up, and all of a sudden the new money couldn't even afford to pay for the new prices. So there's a bit of a balancing act that's going to happen here. And I do admit that 30,000 current wage is not workable anymore. So there does need to be some adjustment, but it's got to be realistic, and it's not got to destabilize our existing setup. My preference would have been if government were to pay more attention, or Labour were to fight more for inflation to be addressed. If prices could come down, then it could make minimal adjustments to the wages.
Well, they are trying
acceptable.
to an extent. I mean, they've called for they started the electricity tariff hike has been one major conversation that Labour has been talking about. They've given a deadline that if it doesn't revert to the rate that it was before the hike, that they will go back, into a protest or go back into a strike. So I think that in that measure, they at least they have made some effort with the electricity tariff. But would you say, with the way that Labour has conducted its activities so far, that it's been very strategic with its its negotiation with the government? They have said that 100,000 is not even a figure to be considered. So with the way that they have carried on, would you say that the Nigeria Labour Congress has gone about it the smart way?
Well, Labour has a cross to bear, and that's the fact that a lot of Nigerians have lost faith in the integrity of the Labour movement, because each and every time they've rattled their saber, they've ended up in the middle of the night reaching a clandestine agreement and coming out and saying, okay, we're not moving forward with this. So people take their posturing with a grain of salt nowadays. So they're battling against that negative public perception. But in this particular negotiation, they seem to be rigid. They've given May 29 or I think May 31 as a deadline in terms of this minimum wage. They're also talking about the electricity tariff, that if it's not rolled back by a certain date, they're also going to resume their protests. So they seem to be serious this time. I listened to both the TUC leader and the NLC leader, and they're in consonance this time, unlike the last time where they were at variance, at loggerheads. This time they're moving forward together in lockstep. So it seems like they've got their act together this time. They've created a formidable force, and they're going to fight this all the way. Realistically, even without Labour's involvement, I mean, we're looking at the organized private sector as well, which has a different interest base from the Labour movement. And they've also accepted the fact that wages have to be adjusted, and they actually pay more than the minimum wage even as we speak. But they themselves have also said, let's review this. Although I noticed that in the recent commentaries, OPL hasn't taken a stand. They've not let their stand be known. At least in yesterday's discussions, they were quiet. Because remember, the committee is tripartite.
Absolutely.
It's government, it's Labour, and it's organized private sector. And they didn't say anything yesterday, and I think that's ominous.
But there's also this feeling, especially from the organized Labour, and not forgetting from the TUC and of course Labour Congress, that from the government's aspect, they are not doing much. I mean, take for instance, we do understand that you need to have representatives from different geopolitical zones who are supposed to make up that of the government that would sit to form the tripartite team. But it seems like these government officials who ought to be there, according to TUC and the NLC, did not show up. In other words, they were like, you know what, go ahead, form your meeting, whatever you agree, we'll get back to you. And that's why they walked out of the meeting. Aside that, they were expecting something huge. Let's use in our local parlance, something huge. But 54,000 naira. I mean, my question to you would be, what do you think is fair enough? You had mentioned 100,000 naira. I could break down 100,000 naira right now, and I'm sure we both know it's not going to hold water. But what do you think should be okay for the average Nigerian?
I don't think what should be okay for the average Nigerian is what we should be discussing as much as what is affordable. What can the state governments look? For example, at yesterday's meeting, the state governors were not really represented. They sent, one or two states sent a couple of people. But let's remember that as we speak, many of the states are not even paying the 30,000. So what's the point of a pie in the sky 100,000 award or 150,000 award that we know cannot be paid? What is the point? We may as well sit down and be realistic. I heard somebody say, and there's some credit to this point of view, that look, let's forget about who can pay and who cannot pay. Let's establish this, and after it becomes law, then it becomes incumbent upon the governors to find the money from somewhere. But that's not tenable, because even the 30,000, more than half the states can't pay. So if you put 100,000 or you put 150,000, they're not going to be able to pay it. So what's the point of having it on the books? And then you find 6 months salary arrears, so many months salary arrears. They can't afford to pay their workers. So I would say that, as we know, the cost of living varies from region to region. Absolutely. So I'm not even sure that there should be a flat rate minimum wage that is uniform across the entire country.
I don't think have figured out what works for them.
Yeah, exactly.
So maybe each state should then apply.
That now goes to this devolution of power restructuring thing that we said we don't want to touch the other day.
Okay. Anyway, go on.
Let's also talk about the government and the government's body language, because that's very key.
Yes.
Would you say that this administration has communicated with its body language that it is concerned about the welfare of the Nigerian citizens? You're talking about the states and some of them not even being represented. 57.6 billion being splurged on SUVs. In fact, very recently, Kano State Governor was criticized for having, bought vehicles for the lawmakers, even though they say it's their entitlement. And Nigerians are saying, yes, it's your entitlement, but is judging by the current realities, is it not a bit insensitive that you can still afford to buy vehicles when the average Nigerian cannot afford to feed? So, judging by the government's body language, would you say that this government is a government that has shown by its actions that it cares for the Nigerian workers?
You missed one out. You didn't talk about the $90 billion subsidy on Hajj.
Exactly.
Because that's another thing that you look at and you say, well, you say you don't have the money for these basic necessities, these priorities, but you can splurge 90 billion on Hajj subsidy, which religious expression is voluntary. It should be individual, it should be voluntary. Yeah. So that's another argument on the side in terms of should government even be involved in sponsoring pilgrimages and Hajjs? Who knows? The point is, money is not being allocated to the things that matter. It's being spent on frivolities you talked about. And even the Kanu one was surprising because it's a different party. In the past, we were putting it at the feet of the APC that you're profligate, you're extravagant. But Kanu is NNPP. And he just last week spent so many billion to buy SUVs for the state legislators. And so you look at it and you say, is government really serious in terms of do they really want to improve the quality of life of Nigerians? Then you look on the other side and you say, look at the student loan program that's coming online the day after tomorrow. That to me is a landmark piece of policy that has the impact to make a big difference in the lives of Nigerians if it is implemented properly, with integrity and without partisanship. So there are some things the government is doing that portrays or telegraphs a notion of seriousness in terms of improving our quality of life. I also think that in terms of this living wage issue, the president has addressed it in a number of fora where he has said he's committed to Nigerians living a better life. Of course, government can't give what it doesn't have. So they're in a delicate balancing act because they're looking at it and say, yeah, we want to help you. We want to make things better for you, but we can't afford it. This is what we can afford to do. So you look at things like the social investment programs that were suspended in the Better Edu days. They're talking about bringing back the school feeding program now. And yesterday I read something about there's 100 billion in the 2024 budget for homegrown school feeding program. Now inflation has spiraled it up to 540 billion, which the government doesn't have. So, but you look at those type of initiatives and you say, perhaps there's a heartfelt desire to do something, to make a difference, but how affordable is it?
Anyway, as we look to wrap this conversation up, I'd like for us to look at this. Could we rightly say that these issues we're having as a result of the fact that before President Bola Ahmed Tinubu got into office, there wasn't a clear point agenda? Because what we see here is like scattering seeds, and everyone is just running around trying to find which one works. We've seen the CBN policy. We just had a guest who joined us. I'm sure you know about the new inflation rates that the rates,
yeah.
all right? And of course, you know what it would do to inflation as well. Now we're struggling with the student loan, and here we are again saying that the federal government doesn't have money. You've talked about the Hajj, we've talked about all of this. Do you think this can be pointed to the fact that the current president didn't have a clear agenda as to what he was coming to office to do?
That would be really disappointing if that is the truth, because the way he came into office, it was very clear that he had thought about it for a very long time. He was very strategic in his planning in terms of how he ascended to the presidency. He had opportunity to have run many times before. He bided his time intentionally till the time was right. So for a person who was that prepared and that focused on where he was going and how he was going to get there, and he had the roadmap down pat because it worked exactly according to plan. So for such a person to now not have had a clear roadmap about what he was going to do when he gets there, it would be relatively disappointing if that were to be the case. And I noticed that there have been quite a few policy flip-flops. The left hand doesn't seem to know what the right hand is doing. Look at the cyber security levy that he had to roll back and say we're not going to do that anymore.
Levy,
even the student
loan,
levy,
take it back.
Yes,
because
absolutely.
Like the I'm sorry to butt in. Like the president
Yes.
of ASU, who was here as well on Monday, said they had told them, don't take this policy. Consult us first. There's some errors we're seeing there, but they ignored.
Yes, so absolutely, it does look like perhaps the realities of office are different from theorizing. When you're on the outside, you can draw up all the maps you want, you can make all the plans, and when you get there and you're confronted with reality, it turns out to be so much different. The MD of Total spoke yesterday and talked about taking a $6 billion investment to Angola, and one of the reasons he gave was policy flip-flops, inconsistency of governance. And so you look at it and you say, what does it actually take, especially if you've known way ahead of time that this is what you want to do? You should be better prepared. I think that's a problem for this government is, as you said, there's a bit of confusion, there's a bit of chaos. And I think within the first year, they should have settled down. I think by now, government should be running on cruise control and things should be flowing without too much tinkering with the structure. I think it should be flowing. So the administration has a lot more work to do.
Kind of like reminds me of growing up. Whenever it rains, we always try to watch television if there was power. And then someone goes outside to touch the antenna. You don't clear, turn. So there's a little
tinkering.
So much tinkering.
Wild mind, Joe.
Meanwhile, Anambra workers, reports have it that they are already threatening their own government because their own 2019 wage award has not yet been implemented while we're talking about a review here in 2024. So it's just a lot that's going on, a lot that's happening.
A whole lot.
Yes.
But we'll keep speaking up for the Nigerian people and, airing their voices, and we hope that they come to a middle ground soon. Because if they don't, what will happen is this 30,000 will linger for the longest time until they can come to a conclusion.
Absolutely. And Labour will probably shut the country down, which will hurt all of us. We don't want to. We don't want
so much. Thank you, Mr. Dyer.
Pleasure as always.
Always a pleasure having you, and thank you so much for your great analysis as well.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Let's bring to you a recap of some of the stories we've had in the past hour. CBN raises interest rate for third time to 26.25%, and a tough one there as well. NLC rejects federal government's newly proposed 54,000 naira minimum wage. That's a conversation we just wrapped up not long ago. And look out for News Central as we hold a town hall meeting in Okama in Delta State community. It will be live at 11 a.m.
And let's share with you what's coming up in the next hour on News Central. Coming up next, Lagos State tops record of domestic violence cases. We'll be joined by the Lagos State Domestic and Sexual Violence Response Team lead. We'll also be reviewing the newspaper front pages right next, and we open the phone lines and hope that you can call in if the weather hasn't affected the network. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Breakfast Central. Now let's share what the front pages of the newspapers are saying. And joining us to review the front pages is Public Affairs Analyst Deyemi Saka. Good morning. Good to have you.
Good morning. It's nice to be here once again.
The rain no dirty or white?
No. We know the grief. We know the grief for anybody.
Fresh.
No, we know the grief for anything and anybody.
I say she don't use no grief for anybody.
Who says that? Who said that?
The army, yes.
Yeah, the police.
Why is
No,
it
the police said don't. The army said use it.
Oh.
The army said no grief for anybody because so that you would be secure your perimeters. Police said don't use it. So who do we listen to?
So no.
God.
All right.
So what did God say on the matter?
Let's see what the front pages are saying this morning. We'll begin with this Nigeria newspaper and see what the front page of this Nigeria says. Minimum wage, again, NLC and TUC reject federal government's 54,000 naira. Organized labor continues negotiation with the federal government today. Nigerians to face further hardship as interest rates hits 26.25%. Hike will hurt real sector investment, says Center for Promotion of Private Enterprise. CBN blames high forex rate, others for driving food inflation. Even though it's not just, thank God for the others. We'll talk about what the others are. Police retirees protest unpaid pensions, demand exit from contributory pension scheme. Mass burial, UBTH gives 6-week ultimatum for 270 unclaimed corpses. Wow. Wike receives Rwandan Swedish envoys, welcomes investors, and at the top of the paper, and the final story, Senate halts moves to create new grazing routes for herders. Let's head over to the Punch and see what the Punch says.
All right, over to the Punch now, the Punch newspaper on a Wednesday morning. Let's take a look at what it says. It says private sector fears loan repayment crisis. Concerning the 26.25% interest rate. It's a conversation we had this morning, and just as you should know, if there's any interest rate, an increase in any interest rate, it automatically affects loan repayment. And everybody needs to do what is called a rate review. So if you've collected loans, take note that the loan company would have to do a rate review and possibly call you today. Don't be afraid. We're just telling you. That's what will happen. Tinubu okay $715 million for rural electrification. Naira slide pushes Dangote diesel to 1,000 naira per litre. Reps panel to probe faulty presidential aircraft. Yes, we heard that. And let's take a few more before we bring in our guests so we can look at these two papers first. Medical tourism spending falls by $5.24 million according to CBN. I didn't start governing fully until this February, Fubara says. So Fubara is trying to exonerate himself, saying, his governing started in February. Oyo Assembly approves Makinde's 10 billion naira loan request. And police launch manhunt for Ogun woman's abductors. Also, failed robbery. Lagos University students escape death.
Wow. Okay, quickly, let's just look at the final paper, Daily Independent, and see what the stories there are. On the front page of the Daily Independent newspaper, national minimum wage, governor's absence stalls negotiation as Labour rejects, fresh 54,000 naira offer. NLC, TUC insist on May 31st deadline to embark on strike. ASU rejects new governing councils, decries mushrooming of varsities. Tinubu's government reckless, misplaces priorities in allocating funds, says Obi. Senate shuts down move for new grazing routes, seeks solution to herders' attacks. CBN raises interest rate to 26.25%. The Patriots to embark on nationwide advocacy mobilization for new constitution. Chetima, Yuguda, Ganduje exonerate Tinubu from economic crisis. We are reinvigorating APC to retain power in 2027, says Ganduje. Tinubu responsible for worsening standard of living, says the AGF. Court declares Rivers local government chairman tenure extension unconstitutional. Federal government insists on patronage, of Nigerian catering services by foreign airlines. Okay, that's interesting. APC chieftain blasts party for dashing Nigeria's hopes in 9 years. I don't know what the details of that is, but I think it makes sense because when you are going on Ethiopian air, the kind of food they're serving you is usually the Ethiopian food. A number of these national air carriers serve their country's food. So I think the only food they can insist on this for would be Nigerian air carriers.
Well, Air Peace already serves.
Air Peace already does that. So I don't know what the logic behind that. I mean,
let's just focus on.
I can just let me say a little input. I have somebody very close to me there that's a cabin crew with people they call PJ private jets, and what the guests on board, which the guests we are talking about, the VIPs, look for such continental food. But I know, as a matter of fact, that they serve dishes known to Nigerians on board. But most of the companies, to the best of my knowledge, is run by foreigners that gets the deal and everything. But the meal on board, or meals on board served on board, 70% Nigerian dishes.
All right. Okay. Fingers crossed. Let's see what that means. I agree with you on the private jet 7 Nigerian dishes. I wonder what that would do. I would assume that they're doing that, insisting on this to sort of help the economy, to help that more income comes. But let's talk about the minimum wage. That's the pink elephant in the room.
I said it. Labor is on serious, and when labor is serious, I for one would know. Because labor's the demand of NLC is unrealistic. Let's face it. You can't be pushing for 350,000, 350,000. We've been shouting. Yes, there's a need for us to cut down on our current expenditure, and we should start with those in public offices. But labor should know adding such financial burden to a dying economy is unpatriotic. So what can we do? It's for labor to push for economic policies, to push for the revamp of the economy, to push for the recovery of the economy, to agitate against some bad policies, advocate for good policies that would push up the value of the naira. Once one naira gains strength, 30,000 naira could get you what 20,000 naira is getting you today. So I think away from just pushing for the minimum wage, there's no way we can push the naira to gain value or strength that would make it get the value it had like 10, 20 years ago. Our economy has been in a total wreck since 2015. So I think the best we can do is, and I said the logical thing Labour could push for is 80,000 naira minimum wage.
Wow, 80,000.
80,000. If Labour is pushing 70,000, 80,000, I'll buy into the argument.
The same Labour that said they don't even want to use their year-to-year 100,000.
It shows you, and this is me saying this, that I've not taken the leadership of the NLC seriously since May 29, 2023. Labour has been doing everything to those of us that have a third eye to believe this leadership is in bed with the government of the day. And that's the truth. Because if you really want to make these demands actualized, you should come up with realistic demands. If I'm the president, commander-in-chief of the federation, and I sit down with organized labor unions or whatever sector, and they're telling me 600,000 naira minimum wage, I'm not going to sit down there for 10 seconds. I'm not going to dignify them with my presence or attention. I'm just going to walk out.
Okay, let's come and talk about would I call it another pink elephant in the room? Everyone is talking about the increase in monetary policy rate. The Punch reports that 2.625% interest rate, and the private sector fears loan repayment crisis. That's on the front page of the Punch. Meanwhile, this Nigerian newspaper also talks about that and says Nigerians will face further hardship as interest rate hits to 6.25%. The riders to that story will see that the hike will hurt real sector investment, and CBN blames high forex rate and others for driving food inflation. We know food inflation is currently at over 40%. So what are your fears about this?
It's evident. I cannot come up with any other thing different from what certified economics are saying. And you and I know it's not. When I was in university, I was in mathematical sciences department, and there was a course statistics. I can't remember which of these, STS 232 or 233. There was something we call real analysis and abstract analysis. On paper, I don't know where this guy comes up with improvement in the economy or what they are saying to give them, A+ ratings and what have you. But the reality on ground shows that Nigerians are suffering. And this will further plunge us into that, that hole. To crawl out of it is going to be very difficult for an average Nigerian. And in spite of everything, the average Nigerian is producing everything for himself or herself. Water, security, and everything, what have you. So, what are we saying? It gives you so much, you're adding more to the burden. And a lot of corporate organizations are running on loans. So there have to be a readjustment of payments or repayment plans, and it probably extends the tenor, it extends what they pay their obligations, and you strengthen these guys further. And why Nigerians are going to cry because of the economic policy, the president's son at some point will be smiling to the bank because the government is probably going to get a loan to finance the Lagos-Calabar Coastal Road. And when ITEC wants to do the profit sharing at the end of the year, his son will get a share as a director. So while Nigerians are groaning under hardship, his middle family is probably smiling to the bank.
So that's quite different from what Nigerians were expecting to get, especially looking
some
at
Nigerians, some of us are not surprised.
It's a tough one. Well, let's look at another story very quickly. Don't forget that you can be part of this conversation. Just call the number and let's get your view, possibly from the Labour Party rejecting the 54...
Labour Union.
Labour Union, I beg your pardon. Labour Union, NLC, and of course the TUC,
technically.
Organised Labour, technically.
Yeah.
Of course, I mean, let's just stick to Labour Union. Rejecting the 54,000 naira. And also the increase, the interest rate, 26.25%. How it's really going to affect living as well. But let's go to another story very quickly. Let's see this one. Olive did take that in the paper, Daily Independent. Yes, I'd like us to look at Daily Independent very quickly. It says, Senate shuts down move for new grazing routes, seeks solution to headers attacks. The other one is Shetima Yuguda, Ganduje exonerating the move from economic crisis.
Well, let's thank this assembly for being at least smart enough to actually not insult our collective intelligence. There was a time in the last 8 years before this administration, we knew how our policy was either rice-driven or cattle-driven. Every policy was directed towards these two, either commodities or what have you. I don't understand the silliness behind still pushing for a grazing route, looking at the population explosion that has happened over the years, looking for the new innovation and farming techniques that has been adopted globally. At the point, what the arguments they pushed out during the administration of former President Muhammadu Buhari was the government should build ranches for people, for herders, because government built airports and private people are using it. So you could imagine such arguments coming just to to pacify a class or a set of people. Grazing out, thank God that that should not be discussed. That I think if you're asking for the policy, document or to the policy trust that will say you should finance or through the Bank of Agriculture to have a cluster of farmers across the country to have ranches, yes, fantastic. I'll key into that, I'll buy into that, because that's a sort of subsidy needed for at least to enhance our food security and food production and sufficiency in feeding ourselves as a nation. But if you're talking about grazing routes, I don't understand, is the route going to be on water? You're still going to walk through people's farms. There's no route you want to create that it doesn't belong to somebody, either a community, either an individual. And you see, I've traveled across the country, at least by road, north to south, north to south, south to east, east to west. And at the point, there was a time I saw, moving from Kaba, going to Abuja. Before you get to this junction, you see these herders coming from a junction going towards Benin, Auchi, Okula, Benin, and they just walked into people's farms land. I see them coming from Mokwa down, as from Mena, either down to Mokwa and what have you, or Bida to Mokwa. I see them trampling on people's farmlands, and you ask, so it's not going to end unless you tell these people to adopt, and their investors to really go into ranching, not grazing across the country. You probably lead a herd of cows or cattle from Sokoto, trekking them down to Ibadan. Do you know what will happen to those on the road before you get to Ibadan? And what's going to be the quality of the beef you're going to get from those things? What if they've been struck by snakes and things like that before they get to the abattoir? What if they've ingested poisonous grass and water before? So you look at the resultant effects of that primitive practice, even on the safety and well-being of your people.
I mean, those are the things that still fuel the farmer header crisis, which in some measure doesn't allow the farmers go to their farms, and also drives up food inflation. So at the end of the day, we're still all suffering as a result of this. But I'd like to take another story on the front page of the Punch newspaper. Governor Siminalayi Fubara says his administration only started February 2024, and this is certainly not unconnected to the crisis that has been brewing. Will I even say brewing? Or the crisis that has been playing out in Rivers State between Governor Sim Fubara, former Governor Nyesom Wike, such that even former President Goodluck Ebele Jonathan yesterday had to step in to say that the state cannot move forward if these feuding parties don't, work together.
I'm laughing because I think I'm looking at it now. I think there's a need for people of Rivers State to turn to God or whatever to pray. I think it's more of a curse on them to see governors since the days of Rotimi Amechi so obsessed with being in the news, and they just have to be fighting and fighting and fighting. This has to stop. Fubara has been commissioning roads since he got into office. Fubara has been visiting project sites since he got into office. Fubara has been talking tough. Fubara has taken executive decisions, have taken actions that shows he's the governor of the state. So please, those actions? What happens? What was that? Was this understuding on how to be a governor? If there are some, I know what he's trying to say, but you shouldn't tell me that there are better ways to eat wiki. This is petty and childish.
And looking at the fact that even the governor himself, Governor Fubara, has been able to win the court case where the 25 lawmakers were being making a request to the local government, of course, extension on their tenure, which of course has ended, and that did not scale through. But then again, I'd like us to go to our last paper. I'm sure we have Vanguard that's available there. Let's see if we do have Vanguard. Yes, we do. Inflation battle. CBN raises interest rate to 26.25%. OPS protests, and it's going to be a big one, by the way. NPR hikes pose danger to economy, according to Nasima. NECA highlights negative impact on investment and inflation. Additional burden for businesses. CPPE says there's no magic wand, Cardoso says. So, Cardoso, from his speech yesterday, I don't know if we'll have that speech ready or we have it on cue. He had made it clear why, from the monetary policy, why it had to be that way. The Monetary Policy Committee, why they came out to indeed ensure that they review the interest rate as well. All right. Anyway, let's take this call. We'll come back to that. Kelly joins us via phone. Thank you so much for calling, Kelly. Go ahead with your points.
Okay. My take is this. I want to first of all ask: are Nigerians actually, suffering? That is the question I want to ask. I want to respond on the minimum wage, saga that the Nigeria Labour Congress, DUC, and then the federal government have been battling over time. Now, I'm from Rivers State, and currently I'm in Ondo State on official assignment. And some of the communities I visited, in fact, while driving into the communities, it looked like, one is just going to a forest. But as a kilometer, 2 kilometers, you will see some more thatch houses in those areas. And I begin to ask, and no medical facilities in those areas. The school premises I saw in one of the communities, I wept inside my heart. Though that was not my primary, assignment to that place. So here we are talking about negotiation, 54,000, that one. And yet, every time the Nigerian minimum wage is always discussed from the labor angle. What happened to this high-profile, Nigerians who drive cars of millions? They live in houses of millions. They run generators, waste our diesel, live extravagant life. Their children, they go to the best schools in the world. And these people are from this community. They are part of these communities we are talking about now. They are part of this labor people we are talking about. And so when you look at the faces of this rich, look at the faces of the poor masses, are we really the same people? Are we from the same country? And what are the legislators from the state to the federal? What are they legislating? What are they talking? What is their own take towards their people? What time will these rich Nigerians look back to the poor citizens and tell us what we really need to do? And every day, on Sundays, we go to churches. On Friday, we go to the mosque. We behave like very religious people. But inside our heart, we are deceitful. What is the way forward? So, speaking too much of grammars on the media platforms, well, fine. But what is the government? What is the government actually doing from their own perspective? What is the way forward? People are really suffering. Like this contract, the least rate of food I can buy is 4,500. And how much is my salary? It's pathetic.
Thank you so much, Kelly, for calling. Kelly,
but this is, in a way, reflects the mindset of a lot of Nigerians.
Yeah.
Like,
those of us saying they should go for 80,000 minimum wage. It's not as if we are not sensitive to the plight of an average Nigerian or worker. It's just the fact that that's what some of us feel is realistic, or I feel is realistic. And I say that because I don't think any governor has the moral right to look at labor in the eyes and tell them they cannot pay that amount of money. Have you counted the vehicles in someone's convoy? Have you counted the number of vehicles in Tinubu's convoy, the president? Or that of Akpabio? And you and I, we were here in this country when they were going on recess, the first recess, and Akpabio said a token will be sent to you. Yes. And you knew how large that token was. So I think there's a need for somebody. I came up with that post. I think a friend of mine was a member of the House of Assembly, Katsina State, and later served with Masari. And it's like there's a need for us to come out with the Nigerian Public Office Conduct Act or law that makes it mandatory for you as a public office holder to patronize state institutions, from schools to health to everything. I have my card at Ave Medical Center. I still go there once in a while. For proximity, I go to the Primary Care Center at Isheri, phase 2. So if I'm preparing myself, because when it comes to, I have my card at National Orthopedic Hospital. So I know what an average Nigerian go through when they're trying to seek healthcare.
At the end of the day, I mean, what Nigerians are asking for is not too much. It's saying that if you're actually going to say we all should endure, then you should endure. We should see you cutting the cost of
government. We can't be tightening our belt and you are losing yours because your tummy is getting bigger. At least mine is reducing.
And another factor, as quickly as possible, would be that you've said prayers in the emails. We don't know how heavy those checks are because there's so much that is shrouded in secrecy. There's so much,
administration,
that we don't really know about. But this is a conversation we can't exhaust today. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Please, before I go, I think we hold this to the family of Ataiwe Ibrahim, the former chief of air staff, Army staff. He died 3 years ago yesterday. There was a radio silence. Even the army that was their top brass was silent, criminally silent about it. And he didn't just die alone. He died with 10 senior officers that Nigeria spent so much training to get to that height, and it's sad, but and there are some events that has made some dates ingrained in our national history that we should not forget. May 3rd, Yar'Adua, former President Yar'Adua, February 20, Murtala Mohammed, and May 21 because of Ataiwe Ibrahim.
Thank you very much for highlighting that. Very, very important. These are people who will always be a part of our Nigerian story and our Nigerian history. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. We have to go on a break now. When we come back, we have another conversation. Stay with us.
Thanks for staying with us here on Breakfast Central. Our final lap has it that Lagos State government has indeed recorded an all-time high rate of domestic violence in the last 1 year. And let's also tell you this, that Commissioner for Women Affairs and Poverty Alleviation, Mrs. Bolaji Dada, revealed that a total of 662 cases were received in the last 1 year and 88 cases were referred to the Office of the Public Defenders.
According to the Commissioner, the Ministry of Women Affairs and Poverty Alleviation received a total of 662 cases, out of which 592 were women and 70 were men. Joining us this morning to discuss this is the Executive Secretary, Lagos State Domestic and Sexual Violence Response Team, Titilayo Vaivo Adeni. Good morning and thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So first of all, we'll say well done on the work that's been done. These numbers are alarming. I think the first question should be, is it that we are seeing an increase in the reporting of domestic violence cases, or there's an actual increase in the violence being perpetuated?
So we believe that it's a combination of the two factors. We believe that there is increase in formal reporting, and there's also increase in commission of these vicious crimes. I always say that these issues have always been there. Domestic violence, sexual violence, but it's been shrouded in secrecy. And so with the advent of technology, social media, with increased public awareness, the demonstration of political will, we are seeing these issues, taking center stage, hence the recording of increase in reporting of cases.
All right. We do understand, if you can make this clear to us, that you would be going to the press today. Do you also want to share with us what the figures are looking like? And personally, I would like to know, do you have like a mapping to which of these areas have the highest number? Is it maybe Ikorodu, VI, or Lekki, or something? Just asking.
Yes. So the Ministry of Justice is delivering its scorecard to the press today, and the DSVA is under the Lagos State Ministry of Justice. At the agency, we provided services to 6,333 survivors last year, between January to December 2023. We record on average of 250 cases monthly, new cases that are recorded at the office. Based on the data, we've been able to identify the top 5 local government areas where we have high reporting. Doesn't necessarily mean that these are the only local governments where these issues are prevalent, but it's where we have increase in reporting from these local governments. And they include Ikorodu, Alimosho, Ushofe. For children, it includes Mushin, and then for adults, it's Etiosa. And this has been for the past 3-4 years. We've had this top reporting from those local government areas.
Now, looking at, the local government you've mentioned, I don't know if there's any underlying common thread we can see among these local governments. What would you say are some of the factors that are causing this? You've mentioned children, and then you've mentioned adults. Etios have been very prevalent with adults. We'll come back to that. So let's talk about what the underlying cause is for children. Would you say it's a case of poverty? What exactly are the causes that lead to this abuse for the children and then for the adults?
Of course, population is a major factor. Alimosho is the largest local government area in Nigeria. So it's not out of place for us to have high reporting of cases in that local government. But I also think that more importantly, a lot of advocacy, community engagement, sensitization has taken place in those 5 local governments I've highlighted, particularly Alimosho. And we must commend non-governmental organizations that have spent decades, advocating in these local governments, heightening awareness. And, we've seen a direct correlation with creating awareness and increase in reporting of cases. When you create awareness, when you let people know about support services that exist, then they will take advantage of those services. So that's one of the reasons, aside from population, there's heightened awareness in these local governments. And of course, there are different factors that contribute to the perpetration of sexual and gender-based violence. There's patriarchy, there's gender inequality, there's stigma associated to it. Hence, sometimes you hear situations where people say the cases we're even recording is not a true reflection of what is happening. You know, there's a saying that for every one case that is reported, 7 have gone unreported, and so you know that's also a factor. Whilst we are encouraged by the increase in reporting, we know that we've not even scratched the surface, because these issues continue to remain some of the most prevalent and underreported vices, not just in Lagos, Nigeria, but globally.
So I wanted to also, just as a follow-up question to that, share with us why it is that women oftentimes are the ones who are at the receiving end. And I ask this because many times we see people say that the focus is always on women and not on men as it should be. So why would you say, or would you first of all say that women oftentimes suffer from this the most? And if yes, why?
I mean, we just have to look at the data. It's not about what I think, right? The data shows us that we have more women reporting cases. Women are at a higher risk of experiencing sexual and gender-based violence. And we have the research that corroborates this, and we also have the data. Last year, 90% of our survivors were female, whilst 10% were male. We are not saying that men do not or cannot experience sexual and gender-based violence. What we are saying is that they can be victims or survivors, but we have women that are more at the receiving end. And it's for different reasons. You know, gender-based violence, at the heart of it is gender inequality. It's patriarchy. The fact that one gender is seen to be superior to the other. And this influences different things, and it takes form in different ways. And so when we say gender-based violence, we're not just talking about DV, domestic violence, and we're not just talking about physical abuse. There's emotional abuse, verbal, psychological, sexual abuse, stalking, harassment, economic abuse. And we have more women, experiencing these crimes and reporting.
All right. Would you say there's still, shock that comes from these violence, especially when it's experienced by women? Do you think there's a lot that's being done to help women speak out more? I mean, well done on the work you've been doing, especially looking at the help that you've provided. But it seems like we still have more women who are quiet about these instances or these violence that they go through. And also, can you share with us what the true image is like for men who are equally sexually abused, especially in Lagos?
So there are different reasons why survivors remain in abusive relationships. There's the fear of the unknown. There's the stigma, victim blaming, victim shaming. There's also the main one, but two major ones actually. Financial dependence on the abuser or on the alleged abuser. Let's not forget that abusers are very deliberate. They try to keep their spouses in penury. They want them to be financially dependent on them so that they don't have that support system. And the moment when the survivor says, okay, I want to break the culture of silence, I want to leave, or I want to speak up, what happens? What happens to their accommodation? And if they are children, what happens to the children? How is this person able to cope and survive? So those are some of the reasons why survivors remain in silence. Not because they are enjoying the violence, but because, they're financially dependent on the abuser. Another major factor is because of the children. I'm sure you've heard it. Oh, I can't leave because of my children. I don't want my children to come from a broken home. Forgetting that when we bring up children in toxic, violent environments, violent families, we are doing more harm than good because we are exposing them to these issues and we are normalizing violence. Hence the vicious cycle of violence. This is what they saw growing up. And then if they don't access psychosocial support, I speak of the children now, there's a high tendency that they will grow up to believe that violence is normal and they will perpetrate violence, right? So children, because of the children, religious and social-cultural factors, financial dependency on the alleged abuser, what will the people say? That phrase has kept survivors in precarious situations, what will people say? People have lost their lives because of what will people say. You know?
Right.
And so let me just use the opportunity to advocate that irrespective of the decision you take, people would say. But the most important thing is be alive so that you can even tell the story, you know, from your own perspective.
All right. I'm still expecting the answer on the men as well. Men being accused as well. And just to top that up, before I wrap up my questions, while you answer that of the men, I'd like you to also look at how do you handle cases of false accusations? Because we've also seen this come up where some people have been wrongly accused. How do you handle that as well?
Okay. So is concerning the men, as I said, we recorded, well, I gave you the percentage, but the number was actually 333 cases of reporting. We received 333 cases from men. Majority of our data is actually domestic violence. So we're talking about physical abuse against men, verbal, emotional abuse against men. In terms of sexual abuse, what we have is more of boys, boys that are sexually abused by men or sexually abused by a female adult, right? And I don't have the exact data, I can share that, but we do have cases reported to us of boys being sexually abused by men or being sexually abused by adult females. Okay. The second question, actually.
Yes. Yes, go ahead with the second question. Falsely accused. Those who were falsely accused.
Yes, it's a crime. Providing false information is actually a crime. It's punishable by up to 3 years imprisonment. Yes, indeed, we've had cases where, especially for sexual violence, we've had incidents where we received a case, we investigate, and our investigation findings revealed that there was nothing like, sexual violence. So as a state, we have to be very careful. When we're talking about sexual violence, when we're talking about rape, defilement, we're looking at up to life imprisonment. So it's not enough for a person to report a case. That is where investigation comes in. We have to be able to link the alleged abuser or the alleged perpetrator to the crime. And so we are not in a rush to immediately charge a case to court. Investigation must be conducted. We must have corroborative evidence that gives credence to the assertions or the claims or the story of the survivor. And it's only when that has been done, when there's a prima facie case, there's evidence, then the case is charged to court. So in the past, we've actually had those kind of issues, and we have advised the Directorate of Public Prosecutions and the police accordingly that such persons should be made to face the full wrath of the law.
Absolutely. Now, I think it's important that we wrap up the conversation by having you talk to people who are currently in marriages or relationships where they're being domestically or sexually abused. I mean, you've given them the first advice that whatever they decide, people will still talk. And I know that there are a number of people who stay back because they're afraid of being shamed and they're afraid of being disbelieved. We saw that in the case of the international case with Didi and how many people did not believe Cassie when she first spoke up. But then the video evidence came out and then people started to believe and speak up. So what would you say to people who are currently in situations where they are being abused, but they're afraid of being doubted, they're afraid of being criticized, and they're afraid of just, taking the next move? What should be the next move for them first?
The next move is to speak up and speak out. When we're talking about domestic violence, people should realize that it doesn't necessarily have to end up in court or the suspect or the abuser or your spouse being jailed. There are different doors of accessing justice. You can take the alternative dispute resolution door, you can take the separation door, you can take the mediation door. The most important thing is, especially if you are in Lagos, there are different support services that exist for you to take advantage of. But if you do not report, if you do not speak out, you will not be able to take advantage of those services. Permit me to inform you that every domestic violence case is a potential murder case. It can be the last shot, the last kick, the last slap. Please, don't wait until it's too late. You can reach out to us on our toll-free line, which is on your screen. And we are there for you as a government. We believe you, and we want you to know that you are not alone.
All right. Titilayo Vivadini, thank you very much for joining us. And the number to call is 0800, I mean, it's on the screen there, 0800-333-333. If you have any issues, you can also reach out to us on New Central TV, and we can definitely redirect you to the Lagos State Domestic and Sexual Violence Response Team. Thank you so much for your time, and well done.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, we've come to the end of today's show. We want to say thank you to our guests, to our viewers, as many who have called, and we want to wish you all a very wonderful Wednesday. We hope you're able to navigate the rainy weather. We'll see you again tomorrow. My name is Olive Emodi.
And I'm Joe Hansen. Thanks for watching. Do have a great day. Coming up next will be News Now at 9. Stay with us.